Certara accelerates medicines using proprietary biosimulation software, technology, and services to transform traditional drug discovery and development. Our clients include more than 2,300 biopharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, and regulatory agencies across more than 70 countries. Hans, you're welcome to bring up your deck, please. Fantastic. So I'll introduce our speaker now. We've got with us Hans Slipka. Hans is my colleague at Certara, where he is a transparency specialist too. Hans has a research background in neuroscience and experience in health information technology. He's also an expert in data analysis, regulatory standards, and best practices in the field of clinical data privacy. Welcome to the event. I'll now turn it over to Hans to begin the presentation.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Great introduction. And thank you to RAPS for having me. Just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen here before I get started.
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so yes, my name is Hans Slipka. I'm a transparency specialist on the Certara transparency and disclosure team. And today I'll be giving a presentation on EMA Policy 70 and how to best prepare for submission to the policy. So there's these are the things that I want to cover. So I want to talk about EMA Policy 70 in general, just to bring everybody up to the same level of understanding so that we're all starting with the same basic knowledge. I also want to talk about what's new in 2023. So obviously, the policy has been on break for a few years. And with the relaunch, there's been several new introductions, several new processes. And even in the past few weeks, we've learned a few new things. So I also want to talk about what we've learned so far. We have a few processes and few submissions on the go, and we're learning new things as they happen. So I want to cover some of those things because I think they'll be very helpful and very relevant to anyone else submitting to Policy 70. And lastly, I want to go over what's still to come. So we're very early in the stages of Policy 70 submissions, and there are a few things that are still outstanding that will be coming in the next few weeks or next few months. So let's talk about EMA Policy 70. And before diving into it, I want to ask the audience two questions to get a sense of where everybody is at related to the policy. So there should be a poll that comes up on your screen, and I'm curious to hear how many people here have submitted to Policy 70 before. So number one, yes, you've submitted to Policy 70, but only before the suspension. Number two, you've submitted, but only for COVID-19 studies, so only in the past 5 years. Number three, you've submitted a project to both the COVID-19 study and prior to the suspension. Or four, you've actually never made a submission to Policy 70. So I'll pause here, give a couple of seconds for everybody to answer, and then we'll move on. Okay, amazing. So it seems like the majority of people have never submitted to Policy 70 before. So hopefully this is a useful presentation, and you learned some great tips and tricks as to how to submit. Interesting to see that no one's submitted both prior and during the suspension. So hopefully, what you learn here, you can take it forward and have some successful suspensions. I also have a second question here, which is, how prepared do you feel about Policy 70 submission? So this is new, clearly, to a lot of us, and there is a lot of information available, but how prepared do you feel? So do you feel very prepared, somewhat prepared, you're not really sure, or you have no active submissions and you're here just for the information? So I'll wait to see if that poll comes up for you to vote. Perfect, there it is. All right. Thank you. Two people feel very prepared. I hope those are my team members who have helped me put some of this presentation together. But for the most of us, we're somewhat ready or not really sure. And I feel the same way. I think we're learning as we go, and hopefully in the next few weeks and next few months, we'll prepare a lot better, and a lot of us can feel more prepared going forward. Thank you very much for voting in those. So let's get into it. What is EMA Policy 70? In their own words, it is the proactive publishing of clinical data submitted by pharmaceutical companies to support their regulatory applications for authorized human medicines under centralized procedure. This is a big mouthful, but essentially what it means is that the EMA will be providing anonymized documentation which supports the use of a drug or medication on a publicly accessible domain. So it's all available online, and you and I can read about drugs and medicines being authorized. The point of Policy 70 is threefold. So number one, it's to avoid duplication of clinical trials. You're developing a drug. You want to make sure that no one else has done a similar indication, has developed a similar drug. You can go onto the data sharing website and see if it's been done before. Number two, it's to build public trust in EMA's scientific and decision-making process by being transparent and providing access to information. And number three, it's to allow the reassessment of clinical data by academics, by researchers, by fellow peers. This is tremendously useful. It helps everyone stay accountable. It helps improve medicine and research, and ultimately it drives healthcare forward so that we can help patients and people with illnesses going forward. So that's the ultimate goal. Ultimately, it's the disclosure of information without exposure of participants and sensitive information. That is the point of EMA Policy 70. So you might be wondering who needs to submit to Policy 70. Up until now, for the past 5 years, it's been exclusive to COVID-19 medicine. So all other trials were on pause for submitting to Policy 70. It was only COVID-19 medicines. Going forward from September, from now onwards, that won't change. So COVID-19 medicines will still need to be submitted to EMA Policy 70, but we'll also now be submitting non-COVID-19 medicine. So it's new marketing authorizations, it's withdrawn marketing authorizations. Essentially, anyone with a marketing authorization opinion that's coming this September or later will need to submit documentation, the required documentation to Policy 70. How does this process of submission look? So without getting too deep into dates and timelines, this is the overall step-by-step process. It all starts off with the submission of the initial marketing authorization. So you've developed the drug, you've gone through all of the clinical research that you need to, and now you want to authorize it for marketing. So you submit an initial marketing authorization application to the EMA. A few months later, you will receive an invitation email. It's a notification that the decision on whether or not it's been approved is coming. And it's also a good reminder that your redaction proposal document package will need to start being worked on so that it can be submitted on time. About 210 days after the marketing authorization application is submitted, you'll get the CHMP opinion. The CHMP is the Committee for Human Medicinal Products. They're the ones that review all the documentation and create and provide a scientific opinion on whether or not this product can be authorized. Regardless if it's a positive decision or if it's a negative decision, you will have to submit to Policy 70. You'll see that arrow that I have from the next step, which is the submission of redaction proposal document packages. That arrow points back to the invitation email, basically highlighting that as soon as you get that invitation email, you can start creating these redaction proposal document packages. And you can actually submit them even before you get your opinion, because the decision, whether it's positive or negative, doesn't really matter. You will still have to submit to Policy 70. So you can actually start thinking about this and start preparing this prior to the opinion. After you've submitted that redaction proposal document package, EMA will then go in and review. They'll review to make sure that it's compliant with their guidelines, that all personal protected data is properly de-identified, and they'll make comments on commercially confidential information, redactions. They'll make comments on your anonymization technique, and then they'll send it back to you and ask for you to rework some of this documentation before providing the final document package that will be sent in for publication, and that will be published on the EMA's clinical data website for everybody to review. Ultimately, the key takeaway is that if you've submitted a marketing authorization application, you'll need to submit to EMA Policy 70. And preparing for this early is critical for a successful and on-time decision or on-time submission. And so what is in scope? What is that package that you have to deliver to EMA for them to review? It consists of 5 parts. So number one, it's a cover letter. This is very straightforward. It's a declaration that your research is truthful, that it's honest, that the scientific evaluation submission matches the publication submission. It also includes a list of documents that you're submitting, and it'll have a checklist for you to fill out to ensure that the initial technical validation after submission is successful. So you've included all the correct documents, everything is titled correctly. That checklist will be included with the cover letter. And then there's 2 sections that are really the crux of the submission, the most important part. That's your clinical research. So there's module 2, which is the clinical overview and the clinical summary. And there's module 5, which are the clinical study reports and the protocol amendments, sample CRFs, and statistical methods. These documents will have to be redacted or anonymized, so that there's no participant information being disclosed, there's no sensitive staff information, and there's no confidential information about your organization. So trade secrets, future plans, things like that that fall under the CCI realm. Along with CCI, you'll have to provide justification tables to explain why you are redacting the CCI information that you did. You'll have to justify it and explain it and prove that it falls within the guidelines of EMA. And lastly, the anonymization report that explains how you went about de-identifying the personal information of participants. This anonymization report is new for the relaunch. And I'll go into a lot more detail about the anonymization report later on in my presentation. But that document is published in its entirety. It will be available on the data sharing website on EMA, and everybody will have access to your methodology of redaction and exactly what was done to de-identify Module 2 and Module 5. So there, like I said, there's been a lot of new things developed since May. In the past few months, even the past few weeks, we've learned about some new things coming out of EMA, and so I wanted to discuss that a little bit. And again, before diving in, I've got a question here to get your feedback on how familiar you are with the changes. So not just with Policy 70, but what's new with Policy 70. So number 1, you're very familiar. Number 2, you're somewhat familiar. Number 3, you're not familiar at all. That's why you're here, to get some input. Or number 4, you're not really sure about the new changes. You're not sure if you've seen all of them or not. So I see the poll is out. I'll give you a few seconds to vote on this. Okay. Great. Lots of people that are somewhat familiar or not familiar with the changes. So hopefully I can answer some of these in the next few slides. I've got some changes highlighted, so we'll definitely talk about that. Now, for those of you that are somewhat familiar, I'm curious as to where you get your information from. So, like I said, there's a lot of information available. There's information available directly from EMA. They've been creating some posts, some documents, webinars, and newsletters. There's also a lot of industry events that are discussing this. I'm curious if some of you have internal team documentation that gets sent out to the transparency and disclosure teams, or if this is the first time that you're hearing about this, that's an option there as well. Great. Glad to see that we're getting our information from the same sources. So I too have been following EMA very closely. It seems about 46% of you have been following the releases from the EMA. It's a great source of information, and I will definitely have links to a lot of these useful resources at the end of my presentation, so that for those of you, if this is the first time you're hearing about this, you'll be able to go to some of those direct sources from EMA and read a little bit more into it. But let me talk about some of the changes. So I think the biggest change that we've seen is the change to timelines. It's slightly different depending on which process you're submitting to Policy 70. But essentially, it's the timeline changes impact two things. Number one, the submission times, and number two, the review time. So one change that's happened with the relaunch is that there is now a longer window for the initial submission. It used to be 40 days. And now the time for you to submit that initial redaction proposal package is 60 days. So they've increased that time. It means that you have more time to submit, but it also means that you have the opportunity to submit earlier and really get ahead of the curve, so that you're not scrambling last minute. Because there is a review process that EMA has to go through. And they have a set deadline of 120 days after the opinion has been granted, at which point they have to publish that information on their site. There is, like I said, review of the de-identification methodology. There's review of the documents to make sure that they're all provided. That takes some time on the EMA side. And so starting the submission process earlier, starting the anonymization process earlier, will definitely help speed up the process and make sure that everything is on time. Ultimately, the key takeaway is that EMA has realized that longer submission periods are necessary to accommodate the long time that it takes to create redacted documents or transformed documents. So being prepared and able to submit the redaction package early is critical to a successful submission. So how do we submit these documents early? How do we get ahead of the curve and start preparing these submissions early on? Well, it really boils down to three key points. Number one is the protected personal data, or the PPD. This is the information in your documents, in your research, that could be used to directly identify individuals, participants, indirectly identify them through the use of the data that's in the documents. And so you should be prepared and understand the strategies of protecting this data. you should be aware of the different approaches. So the qualitative work versus the quantitative approaches, and the standards that EMA expects from its applicants. So being familiar with risk thresholds and these expectations, and knowing those redaction standards, and being able to apply them to the documents that you're submitting early on will definitely speed up the process. Number two, the commercially confidential information. So information that's economically impactful to you and in the hands of a competitor might financially be advantageous to them, and might economically impact you. The best way to protect CCI is to get started early. We tell our clients, you don't actually need to have a submission in the works to start thinking about this. You can learn from previous submissions. You can learn from online guides, online resources, or you can ask experts to help you develop a CCI library that contains all of your trademarked information, all of your confidential company secrets, and establishing something like a CCI library that's accessible to your whole team, and then training them on how to use it can save you a lot of time. You can, keep in mind the CCI even before you start a submission during the authoring stage. You can reference that CCI library and say, you know what, we're gonna think about lean authoring and prevent adding some of this information that's really not necessary to have to understand the clinical research. So being able to identify and redact or even prevent the inclusion of commercially confidential information will definitely help you get an early start on this. And lastly is the anonymization report. So it's new. It's relatively straightforward. There's a great guide on how to use the anonymization report. And so familiarizing yourself with the new format will definitely help speed things up. The key idea is to be ready to identify and protect sensitive personal and commercial information. Be ready early in the process to ensure that your submission is compliant and properly anonymized or de-identified, so that it's ready to submit when the time comes for that submission. Speaking of the anonymization report, I want to talk about this because I think this is one of the greatest part of this new EMA relaunch is the anonymization report template. So it's 3 pages. It's a PDF document. I have a screenshot here on the slide. And as you can see, it's all very structured. So there's tick boxes, there's drop-down menus. Previously, applicants were developing their own anonymization report for every submissions. The ones that were a little more organized maybe had a template or had some kind of program that had structured data put into it, and it would spit out an anonymization report. But now there's a template that was directly created from by Health Canada and EMA together, and it should include everything that is needed to submit in these anonymization reports. Really, this should benefit you as the applicant because all of the content that you need to submit is predictably presented in the report, and it should speed up your writing of this. So everything being drop-down menu, right where to go. You can select all of the indirect identifiers that you have in your documents, say whether they're for the participants or the personnel, and what your anonymization technique was. It should greatly increase the efficiency with which you'll be authoring this, and it also means that you'll be at some point able to submit just one anonymization report to both Health Canada and EMA. As it stands right now, only the EMA is accepting it. We tried to submit one of these anonymization reports a few weeks back to Health Canada, And they said to please use the old template because this is still in its pilot phase, but they should start accepting it at some point in the fall. So when that comes, it'll, again, make it a lot easier for you as the applicant, but it'll also make it easier for the regulators to review because there'll just be one anonymization report. Both the EMA and Health Canada will be able to review the same report, and it should speed up the review process. Lastly, it should also benefit the portal users. So like I said, if you are interested in learning about a particular study, or you're interested in collecting some kind of metadata on, let's say, height, you can go onto the portal, you can review these anonymization reports, and you know right where to go. So you're looking at height, you know to go to section 2.2, check what was done with the height and say, you know what, I can review this, this study, it's got height retained, it's perfect for my use case. And so it should make it a lot easier for portal users to also go through. One thing that this anonymization report has are these built-in notifications. And I think this is awesome. It will very much cut down the time that it takes to review. So essentially what these are pop-up notifications that come up if you try to do or try to fill something out that goes against EMA's initiative or the guidance. So if you try to redact narratives or you try to redact adverse event terms, it will immediately bring up this notification saying that what you're doing goes against the EMA guidance. This is great because previously you'd have to wait to submit it. The regulators would have to review it. Then they would come back with the same exact feedback. Now it's all built into the anonymization report. So you know if you've gone against the guidance and that you have to justify it a little bit more, perhaps in the deviation section, you know that you've got some additional work to do. This is also a great example of how getting ahead of the curve and starting to work on this early on can actually save you time. If you start filling out this anonymization report early on and you see that you've done something incorrectly in your documents, you can go back and fix that even prior to your initial submission. Sometimes this can be quick, sometimes it could take a couple of minutes, but sometimes you have a submission of 80,000 pages that you have to go through and review and make sure that everything that you've done in there is in line. So I think these built-in notifications are amazing. And honestly, this new anonymization report, I can't wait to use it. I think it'll be very helpful and it'll definitely speed up the process. EMA has also started sending out these lists of expected documents or LEDs. It's a document that has all of the expected documents for a submission written out for you as the applicant. It allows you to review the documents that you've de-identified and to make sure that everything that EMA expects is in that submission. It should decrease the chances of an incomplete submission. And so use this to verify that the submission is complete. Make sure that all of the documents that EMA expects are properly anonymized and included in the package. And this is a great tool to align with EMA's expectations. So what have we learned? Like I said, we've learned a lot, and we're constantly getting new information about the process. One of the things that we've learned is that the pre-submission meetings that EMA offers are tremendously useful. So we've had the opportunity to be part of these pre-submission meetings. We have a few coming up as well, but they've been very helpful. EMA asks that these are structured, and so they ask you to submit about a week in advance a list of questions, a couple of slides of your whereabouts in the process, so that they can provide a thorough answer. These aren't just yes or no answers. EMA really provides some thorough answers to your question and also some general guidance around that topic that you might be asking about. They'll also provide additional commentary to the specific stage that you're at and provide some helpful tips. So these pre-submission meetings have been great. The other thing that you can use these pre-submission meetings for is to discuss project-specific topics. You can bring up the list of expected documents. Perhaps there's some discrepancies between what you were expecting to submit versus what was given by EMA. There might be something that's out of scope that you thought was in scope. This is a great time to bring that up. It's also a great time to discuss things like extensions and timelines and dates. I know this has been, a topic, a question that we get a lot. With the work taking longer than expected, we might require some kind of extension. So this is a great opportunity to ask EMA about specific timelines. And it's also a good time to talk about joint submissions. So because EMA and Health Canada are working collaboratively on a lot of these things, joint submissions will definitely become popular going forward and kind of necessary going forward. We have one of these pre-submission meetings coming up at the end of the month, and we actually have EMA and Health Canada joining on this meeting, which is fantastic because we'll all be, hopefully, by the end of the meeting, we'll all be on the same page, and the expectations will be the same for EMA as they are for Health Canada. So let's talk about these joint EMA and Health Canada submissions. A lot of what has come out with the new Policy 70 is mirroring what has been happening with Health Canada. And so the goal is that these joint submissions to EMA and Health Canada will be possible going forward. This should be communicated early on. So when you get your invitation letter, that's a great time to let EMA know that you'll also be submitting to Health Canada. And hopefully the review and the entire process should be similar for Health Canada and EMA. We're hoping that the submission package will also be the same and that you'll just have to make one. Again, currently with the anonymization report not being accepted by Health Canada, that might be a slight discrepancy, but other than that, the expectations are very similar. So the expectation on redacting personal information, the expectation on redacting and justifying confidential business information or commercially confidential information is very similar. You have to provide justification for both regulators if you're redacting CCI or CBI. And the in and out of scope documents should be very similar as well. So we're hoping that going forward, the submission package will be the same for both regulators. This is something that we want to bring up in that pre-submission meeting and clarify with both of them so that we're all on the same page. But our understanding is that going forward, there will be one submission and one review to both Health Canada and EMA. Speaking of commercially confidential information, there's some great data that came out of the COVID-19 era of the Policy 70 submissions. So over the past 5 years that I wanted to share because I think CCI is at the top of the list of things that people are interested in and curious about as to what it is, how to identify it, how to redact it. And EMA has provided some great data here. So during the COVID-19 only submissions, there were 46 submissions made to Policy 70. Of those, only 7 had CCI proposed, and only 3 were accepted. Only about 0.01% of pages submitted had CCI accepted. That's about 21 out of 207,000 pages. It's not a lot. And the reason for that is that the majority of information that is submitted as part of the EMA Policy 70 submission should be relevant to the study, to the point where it shouldn't be redacted, because it's important to understand the studies at hand. So EMA has a great guide on CCI, and their expectation is that there shouldn't be any CCI in the clinical documents. The places that EMA has accepted CCI has been in the clinical overviews, the summary of biopharmaceutical studies and associated analytical methods, and in the protocols. And really, the information usually consists of detailed manufacturing methods, novel assay information, or future products. And again, we're really pushing to focus on this lean authoring and disclosure without exposure. So not including it in the studies to begin with, so that it doesn't have to be redacted later on. So really, bottom line is that EMA doesn't really expect there to be CCI in the clinical documents. The takeaways that we've had from other submissions is to be familiar with CCI. Really, that's been a very common issue and a common comment from our clients. And so being familiar with the guidance, having your team be familiar with the guidance, and having a CCI strategy in hand will definitely help with your submission. We've learned that timelines are critical, and being ready and prepared early on, and also being ready for this feedback and incorporating it into your documents has been critical in making those deadlines and having submissions made on time. And we've also learned that communicating is one of the best ways that we can stay on top of everything. Whether it's communicating internally with your team about timelines, communicating with your vendors, or communicating with the regulators through these pre-submission meetings, through emails, getting clarification. Key takeaway is that, ironing out the process and steps that take the longest to fit in with the timelines allotted for the submission, it really, really helps in creating these submissions on time. The best way to do this is to get started early and proactively plan for these submissions, and be open with communication. So what is still to come? Well, there's several things that we're waiting on, and I'm sure there's many more that others are also waiting on. But number one, we're waiting to see when Health Canada will start to accept the new anonymization report. I'm sure once it happens, you'll hear about it from us. You might hear about it from others in the industry, or you might hear about it from Health Canada directly. So that's still to come at some point this fall. Invitation letters should have been sent out to everyone expecting CHMP opinions this month in September. But if you're expecting that verdict later on in a month or two, those invitation letters might still be on their way. So look out for those. The offering of pre-submission meetings, like I said, we've done a few. We've got a couple coming up. I urge and recommend to everyone to take advantage. Get your questions answered directly from the source and talk to the regulators. We found it to be very helpful so far, and so we hope that it'll also be helpful to you. So definitely take advantage of that. And look forward to the feedback on the initial redaction proposal document packages. It's not always nice to receive a lot of feedback, but really we can learn a lot from the feedback that we'll be getting. And I think it's tremendously valuable to take this feedback and learn from it. And so I look forward to seeing what EMA recommends to us, what feedback they have on our redaction methodologies. And I'm excited to incorporate it into our process, so that going forward, we'll have, efficient submissions, and we can make and submit as many of these new studies as we can to really push medicine and push healthcare forward. Lastly, I have this reference slide. So I mentioned a couple of online resources throughout my presentation. There is a lot of information available, and there's no way that I could cover all of it in 1 hour. So I've provided this list of references for you to go in, and I recommend that everybody goes in and does some research. A lot of these are from EMA. There's a question and answer document. There's templates for the CCI justification tables. There's a presentation on specific timelines for different procedures. It's all available here. So take a screenshot. This package, the documents or the presentation will be available to you so that you can look at this later on as well. But use these resources, and they're incredibly helpful. So please have a look through some of these links for more information. And that's everything that I have for today. I hope that was helpful and useful. There's a lot of information there, and hopefully I provided some insight. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, stemming from this, and we have questions as well for the regulators. But I would love to take some questions now if there's some available, and maybe discuss some things that the audience might be curious about to hear.
Right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Hans. We definitely have a lot of great questions from the audience. Someone wanted to know, is there a checklist available on the EMA website for the documents you need to do for the submissions?
That's a great question. So there is, if you go into the actual guidance, so the third link down here, there is somewhat of a checklist available in there that should provide some of that information, and the exact documents that should be submitted. The best way to find out what specific documents you'll need is to look for that list of expected documents that EMA will be sending out. That is specific to your submission. So it should have the exact documents that you have on your end. Otherwise, there is also a list of in and out of scope documents at the bottom of this external guidance that should tell you what is in and out of scope of Policy 70 submissions. And it provides a lot of information. It lists all of the appendices. It lists all of the possible documents that you could be asked to submit, but also the documents that are out of scope. So there's a lot that's out of scope for Policy 70, and in that external guidance, it's all written out in great detail.
Great. Someone wants to know, can we also redact PPD, or is anonymization the only way?
Right now, as far as we know, they are accepting both qualitative and quantitative approaches. So redactions are fine. I think transformations are preferred. However, there's definitely pros and cons of both of these methodologies. So, it's often a question of cost and often a question of time. And so going back to my suggestion of preparing these early on, that might be a good way to circumvent some of the resource-heavy work that's needed for transformation of data. But as far as we know, they are accepting both qualitative and quantitative, so redaction and transformation approaches.
Great. And just want to gently remind everyone, we've got a ton of great questions here for Hans, and we're gonna answer we'll ask and answer as many as we can. But if folks can put their questions in the Q&A box for us, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Can you tell us when in the Policy 70 timeline the agency is sharing the list of expected documents?
It's prior to the submission. So I believe it should be with the invitation letter, but I do have to double check on that. But I believe you'll have the expected documents available to you prior to the submission meeting. And so I believe that it's during or around the time of the invitation letter.
Great. What CCI could be expected in the protocol?
It depends how you author the protocol. Ideally, no CCI. So in the guidance, there is an extensive list of things and items that are not CCI. And one of those things is protocols. The expectation is that the protocol shouldn't include anything that is considered or acceptable to be CCI. But we have seen this before. So we've actually reached out to EMA to ask about this because there were some specifics on formulation that a applicant had in the protocol. We thought it was way too much detail to have, but it was present in the protocol, which typically we say shouldn't have anything CCI related. So we reached out, and the answer that we got from EMA was that the list of things that aren't CCI in the guidance is a recommendation, and that with proper justification, with something, a defensible argument, if that can be made, then redactions in the protocol in terms of CCI can be made. However, our recommendation is to think about this when you're authoring those documents, and to not include too much of this. We have seen some future plans in the protocol as well, which really there's no purpose to having those in the protocol. And so we're really strongly pushing this lean authoring strategy to not have that in the protocol. But ultimately, it really depends on how you author those documents. So there can be a lot of unnecessary information in there that can either be taken out during the authoring stage or it can be redacted later on. But the expectation is that it's just not put in there to begin with.
Makes sense. Can you explain what a sequence number is on the control sheet?
Yes. So this is part of the ECTD submission guidelines. So right here. So sequence numbers are used to differentiate and identify separate submissions of the same application over the life cycle. So if you have some revisions that need to be made, you'll get a subsequent sequence number so that you can identify where in the submission process the particular submission is. So usually it will go sequentially. So, the initial first submission will be something like 000. The next one will be 01, 02, and so on and so forth. It's basically a tool used to understand which submission and where in the life cycle of the product the submission is at. It's all written out in the guidance of the ECTD specifics, and so you can go there and get some more information on exactly how to number sequence steps.
Great. This might be, and this question might need to be followed up by email, but someone was asking, do you have the email to ask for a pre-submission meeting?
As far as I understand, you can directly reply to the invitation letter requesting that pre-submission meeting. But that's what's in the guidance, and so I assume that you can respond directly to them and request that pre-submission meeting.
Great. Will the EMA also review CTA submission redaction the same way as a Policy 70 redaction proposal?
The expectations for de-identification are very similar for these two submissions. So they're separate processes, but the information that needs to be protected, whether it's through redaction or transformation, should be similar between these two procedures, but they are separate processes.
Have you been surprised by anything, either positively or negatively, in the relaunch of Policy 70?
I've been very pleasantly surprised with how much information is available, how much information EMA has provided to go with this relaunch. I think they've done a great job outlining most of the questions that we have, whether it's through direct communications or through their webinars or through their documents that they've posted. Their guideline is very thorough. Their list of changes is very thorough. So I've been very pleasantly surprised with how much information is available. So that's really been great. But I think that's a subjective question. So I'll move on from that.
It makes sense. Do you think that the exclusive use of redaction is problematic?
Again, I think this is a subjective question, but I think there are definitely benefits to both strategies of data protection. There's a lot of advantage to quantitatively measuring risk. There is much more data utility. So if you want to take some of the information from publications that have been made and use it for yourself or use it for any purpose, the use of risk assessment and only protecting or transforming the information that's necessary to meet those risk thresholds has its value. I've heard from the majority of our clients who would rather be conservative and protect as much of the data as they can. And so if it's more than necessary, a lot of applicants would prefer that. So I think it depends who you ask. A lot of small pharmaceutical companies want to protect their IP. They're new to the game, and when it comes time to competing with some of these giants, they don't want to have too much data utility. They don't want to give too much away. So I think it depends on who you are when you're submitting. And I think it depends on the resources that you have available. I've talked about the time that it takes. It's obviously much more expensive. You know, the more time you spend on something, the more expensive it is. So that is definitely a barrier to entry. But there are, you know, great techniques. There's great software that we use, that I'm sure others use as well, that make risk assessment much easier and faster. And so I think going forward, that's definitely going to keep developing. And so I think there's benefits to both. And it really just depends on the situation.
I think we'll have time. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so that we'll probably have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll need to wrap up. Have updates occurred to Policy 70 in preparation for the restart that companies who have already sent their submissions in will need to address to remain in compliance?
Yes, good question. So most of these changes are effective as of September with the relaunch. A lot of this information has been communicated over the past few months. So really, the submissions happening right now, right from the start, right from the relaunch, everyone should be aware of those changes that are happening. So there really shouldn't be any surprises at this point. If you've gotten your invitation letter, you've gotten your opinion, and you're now submitting these redaction packages, because this information has been available. EMA has done a great job at informing the public on the changes. I'm sure there could have been some situation for COVID-19 studies that were submitted somewhere in between, you know, the time when this relaunch was announced and the actual relaunch in September. However, I think that's a unique situation, and I'm sure that EMA has been clear with those individuals and with those participants as to what their expectations are, and I don't think it's going to be an issue for submission starting in September. So I think it should be fairly clear now what is expected going forward, and there shouldn't really be too many surprises.
Great. We'll ask one last question, Hans, and then we'll wrap up. Can you tell us about what the software you use for risk assessment?
Very generally, it's a software that we can use to input all of our direct, indirect identifiers, and it will use several other factors related to population, to the number of participants, to the rarity of the indication, and it will quantitatively assess the risk of all of the different variables. So direct identifiers, indirect identifiers, and that allows us to get an idea of where the risk is, and specifically create a redaction strategy targeted at specific data to be within the threshold of risk, while maintaining some other data that can be used for data utility. Essentially, it means that instead of redacting all indirect and direct identifiers, we can pick and choose, and then we can measure the risk to make sure that anything that we've retained doesn't pose a risk to directly re-identify any of the participants. I know there's several of these softwares available, and we're lucky to use a really good one that's quick and effective, and we've got some great experts on our team that are able to use it very efficiently. So
great. Well, thank you so much, Hans, and thank you so much to our audience for their excellent questions. Our next webinar with RAPS will be Plain Language Summaries, Understanding the Why Behind the Regulations and Guidance, and that will be on October 18th. Be sure to sign up for this great webinar on the RAPS website.